Jan posted it, so that's great. Okay, so we should be recording now. Yes, we're recording.
Okay, so there's Missouri there in the corner, and this is the land cover of Missouri, and we'll look more at that later. So way back when, there was a guy at the University of Kansas who did the potential natural vegetation of Kansas, and then he expanded that to the United States. It's A.W. Kuchler, and so this is a sort of a historic map of the potential vegetation at a kind of a coarse resolution, but it was great at the time. So what I'd like you to see is this green is deciduous forest, and this sort of off tannish is a mix of forest and grassland. And this dark green here is either pine or mixed pine forest. The orange is cedar glades, is what he called, and then this aqua color down here is the Mississippi alluvial basin, and it's listed as bottomland forest. So one of the things to note, quite a bit of pine and mixed pine in this view. And then this is the Pre-Settlement Prairie and Pine of Missouri by Walter Schrader, who was a geographer at the University of Missouri. I guess the thing to note here, again, quite a bit of pine and mixed pine, and then a lot of prairie, especially north of the Ozarks and out here on the flat Osage Plains, but still also quite a bit of patches of prairie in the Ozarks and the flatter parts of the Ozarks, quite a bit of prairie. We're right there, sort of on the outer Ozark border, with a little bit of the city edging into the Till Plains on the east and northeast side and far north. So this is the National Land Cover Data Set, which is pretty coarse resolution, but the green is deciduous forest, the light green. And you can see St. Louis. Here's Columbia, here in Boone County. There's Kansas City. This is Springfield, and so on. You can see a little bit of dark green down here, and that's pine. And you can see a little bit of dark green down here, and that's cedar. A lot of that cedar. But look up in here, there's still some dark green up there. So there's quite a bit. We'll zoom in on these. Not too much pine in the area, remember, that was pine. And so there have been studies on this. Rich Guyette and Daniel Day did this study, 66% reduction in shortleaf pine in Missouri. So what they did is, it was valuable for, wood products. They cut it all down. There was a lot of pine cutting, and it's not all returned to pine. But this is an area around St. Louis. This is just this gray here is the corner of St. Louis. There's the Missouri River. Here's the interstate as it comes out of St. Louis. You see all this dark green, and all of the dark green in there, darn near all of it is cedar. It's eastern red cedar. And that's one of the most notable things that you can see in national land cover maps is the increase in eastern red cedar. And there was a recent paper, Westburn expansion of eastern red cedar in the eastern United States. This is based on the forest inventory and assessment data, plot data, which are repeatedly sampled permanent plots. So yeah, eastern red cedar has increased throughout, the whole area east of the eastern deciduous forest, and including in Missouri.
So question.
Yeah.
So red cedar, is that the kind that grows kind of like a weed in Missouri?
Yeah, the eastern red cedar is the only cedar that grows
Okay.
In Missouri, except for ash juniper, but that's really restricted to the southeast. Here's something you can get for free: EPA ecoregion maps, and there's one for Missouri and Iowa. There's one for Texas. There's one for other compilations of states. And this is a really nice overview of the lay of the land and the vegetation. You can see here, where's our Where's my cursor? There it is. We're right here in what he called the river hills, which extend along the Mississippi and the Missouri River. And this green down here is the Ozarks, and then this is the Till Plains. So this was prairie, this was wooded, and this was prairie too. And we're right here in the river hills. And if you look at the material, and again, this is all free online. You can get all this, and you can read about your region, and you know, loess, which can be thick in some places, mantles the ridges and uplands of this area. Deep sandy and silty soils are on the river valleys. And Paleozoic bedrock is resistant to erosion. And so the Missouri River Valley, the floodplain, is narrower as it cuts through the Ozarks than it is immediately upstream, like at Glasgow. And then, you know, we're here in the River Hills, 72F. And another part of the area, you gives the physiography and the geology and the soils and the general vegetation and the current land use. So this is, yes.
Till plains, are you basically talking about where commodity crop production is being done?
No, the Till and Luss plains are the glaciated areas where glaciers left Till when they retreated. Yeah.
So with respect to agricultural land, looking at this map, how would I identify that?
Most of the most of the Till plains is fairly flat and fertile and was prairie and is crop now.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And we can probably look at that. There's probably something else in here. If not, I can go back to it.
Thanks.
Another thing you can get online for free is the ecological site descriptions from the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. These are arranged by major land resource areas, and you kind of got to know how to do that to navigate to get to them. But they are there. I'll help you look, and if you have a lot of time, you could figure it out yourself. I mean, you know, not that much time, just persistence. But here's a sandstone upland woodland, for example. And there's this sandstone protected backslope forest type, which gives you the reference state. This is the pre-European settlement state, and then some unmanaged forest state and so on. So a lot of stuff about the site type. And then there's also species associated with these ecological site descriptions. So this is white oak, northern red oak, bitternut hickory, and red maple, and so on. So a lot of good information in these ecological site descriptions, and they're spatially mapped. These are all mapped. Another good source of information nationally is this NatureServe Explorer, and you can just Google that. And I have Missouri checked and ecosystems checked, see? And this gives you all the ecosystems at various resolutions in Missouri. And I'm going to look at these ecological systems. There were 36. So this is the Ozark Ouachita Dry Music Forest. This is the most common one, the typic forest in the Ozarks. And there's all this good information, a summary. You know, the type description gives you all sorts of species, the environment, which is, you know, gives you the landforms and soils and so on. And again, that's all on NatureServe Explorer. Now we're getting to the good stuff. There are two books, the first of which is The Terrestrial Natural Communities of Missouri by Paul Nelson. I have a copy up here you can look at. It's kind of a must-have thing if you want to explore the vegetation and ecology of Missouri. It's arranged the biogeography, ecological management, conservation planning, and community descriptions. The community descriptions make up about 2/3 of the book, so that's what it mainly is. And so, for example, here is the major types that are in the book: forest, woodland, savanna, prairie, glade, so on. And then I've just pulled out the forest, and the forests are subdivided based on the substrate they occur on. So lust till, limestone, dolomite, chert, sandstone, sand, igneous, and bottomland. So, and these are all given descriptions in the book. So this is really cool. And in the Ozarks, just my own, just to be really generalized, I think of the Ozarks as being primarily deciduous forest. So it's sort of typic deciduous forest, unless it's mesic, where it's wet, or deciduous woodland. Where it's wet, it's deciduous forest, and where it's dry, it's a different kind of forest. So, you've got these divisions of the forest based on how wet the site is. Yes.
Example you gave before was the dry music.
Yeah.
Like, isn't that an oxymoron? Is it? 'Cause
Okay. So this is a nomenclature from NatureServe, the Nature Conservancy, and the National Vegetation Classification. Never made any sense to me, still doesn't, but I still use it because that's what they use. Dry mesic is the forest from dry to mesic. Then there is a dry type and a mesic type. Dry mesic is everything in between. So dry mesic is this big, dry is this big, and mesic is this big. So yeah, yes, Lynn.
But what's between a forest and a woodland?
Oh my God. The difference between a forest and a woodland, people get really excited about this now.
People.
Ecologists, forests have enough sun to the ground to support a good herbaceous layer of vegetation. Woodlands do. So they don't have as much canopy. Forests have so much canopy that there's only just sort of a spring flora. And then during the summer, there's not much growing on the forest floor. So that's technically the way they describe it, basically. And Paul Nelson will tell you all about it in his book. But anyway, so there's the mesic, the dry mesic, which is typic, and then the dry. And then there's further subdivisions based on substrate. And there's the high pH substrate, the basic substrate, which is limestone dolomite. And then there's the low pH substrates, which is most of the sandstone, sand, igneous, chert, those are low pH. So the low pH types have things like post oak and blackjack oak, and the high pH types have things like chinkapinga oak and bumelia. So there are differences in the vegetation, and then there are further differences in the vegetations within those. I'm getting off, so we'll just go on. But one of the things you can do, and I have done with Paul Nelson's book, is you can arrange the types: dry chert, dry mesic chert. This is woodlands. Whoops, let's go back this way. This is woodlands, so there's no mesic. There's no mesic woodland. So there's dry and dry mesic woodland because the mesic type is a forest. Anyway, these are the dominant and characteristic species of these different types. So if you look here, black oak is kind of across everything. It's dominant everywhere you look. But if you look at something like post oak, it's dominant in this dry chert, which is low pH. It's dominant in the dry sandstone, which again is low pH, but it's not dominant in the dry mesic chert because it's too wet there. Instead, you have things like white oak that might be in the dry mesic. So anyway, you can do stuff like this and teach yourself about the ecology of Missouri based on, summarizing things that are in Paul Nelson's book, which are really, really nice. The other thing you can get for free about Missouri, which is really excellent, is the Atlas of Missouri Ecoregions. Paul's book you're going to have to buy. The Atlas of Missouri Ecoregions is free online. I could send you a link to that. But It's really excellent as well. And it sort of summarizes the ecoregions, and I'll go through that a little bit. But it also summarizes at a coarser resolution the climate and geology and elevation. I'll look at that a little bit, but you think of the precipitation decreasing from east to west as you go from the deciduous forests to the prairies, to the shortgrass prairies till you hit the Rocky Mountains. But you can see in Missouri, the precipitation really decreases to the northwest. So there's a broad area in central Missouri where the precipitation is about the same. So any differences in the vegetation isn't not necessarily due to climate across there, it's due to the landforms and geology and so on. The Ozark Plateau really is a plateau. You can see the red areas are the highest areas. So Tom Sock Mountain, it's just the highest part of the plateau. So that's high. It's high in here, but it's also flat. You see pink is more rugged, and green is not as rugged, and blue is less rugged even. So this high area is a high flat area. So that's kind of cool, and if you go into the river hills, the rivers dissect the plateau, and it's a hillier region. So part of the Ozarks is flat, pretty flat. And it was pretty open and grassy and wooded, but not as wooded as heavily wooded as the rugged areas. So it's another thing. You can find that in the Atlas of Missouri Ecoregions. And here are the main ecoregions, the land type associations described in the Atlas. And the little red circle is where we are. Again, we're on the edge of what Tim and Walter call this the outer Ozark border. And the EPA level 4 ecoregions called it the River Hills, but it's the same region. The River Hills ecoregion is distinct because it has a little bit different geology. There's caps of sandstone more often, at least, in the River Hills. And then here's the Till and Luss Plains, the brown areas you were asking about. Those are mostly cropped, or a lot of them are cropped, except where they're a little bit more hilly, like up in the Sheridan River Hills. But this is another thing from that book. This is the current river hills, which are so darn famous, and everybody knows about how the geology and soils and vegetations is distributed in the current river hills. This is one of the land type associations. It's in gray here. And this is it's depicted in gray right here. And then this is a cross section of it. And you can see what Tim has done here. Okay, we're in the northern hemisphere. So the sun is in the southern sky. And in the evening, the sun sets in the west, and that's when it's the hottest. So slopes that face south and west and southwest are the warmest slopes and the driest slopes, and it does have a major effect on the vegetation. So a southwest facing slope is a lot drier looking than a north or a northwest facing slope. And so eventually somewhere over in here, if you were talking about deciduous forest, you would get a dry one. Most of it would be dry mesic, and then eventually over here on the moist slopes, you'd get mesic forest. So, and typically, or most often, the pines are in the drier sites, and that's what's depicted here, the pines on the dry uplands. This is a Rubidoux formation. I think that's a sandstone formation. And so the pines are up on this drier ridge and on the dry slopes, and not so much on the wet slopes. So this kind of thing is for every single LTA. It's in this book, in the Atlas. So here we are again, zoomed in on Columbia. The gray is city, and there's just city. The brown here is cropland, and you can see the cropland down along the Missouri River. And you can also see the cropland as you hit the Till and Less Plains. The areas that aren't cropland, like right here and right here, they're a little bit steeper topography. The flatter areas are almost all cropped in the Till and Less Plains. The other thing you can see here, well, except for the segments of the Big Muddy National Wildlife Refuge, it's all cropland. This aqua color are little areas of public land on the Missouri River floodplain, the Big Muddy Refuge. The other thing you can see, maybe if you use your imagination, and I can't find my cursor again. There it is. As you go through the Ozarks, this river valley, even though it's very wide when you cross it, like on the way between here and going toward Jefferson City, it's much narrower than it is out here in the Till and Less Plains, because it's constricted here by the harder to erode Ozark geology. And that was talked about in that EPA level 4 ecoregion, write-up. So this kind of stuff, it's all in there. It's really kind of cool stuff. So this is the LTAs of the outer Ozark border. This is most of Columbia is in this, and we're in this oak woodland forest hills central outer border, and it gives you the, there's lush, and then there's different kinds of limestones and so on, and just the landforms. And some places have karst. And more specifically, we're here. Dang, I really wish this would go away so you could see that better.
Push it up.
When I push it up,
Let's click on your, well, you've been clicking on your picture. I don't know how to.
there it is. It kind of pushed up a little bit. Anyway, this is from the Atlas of Missouri Ecoregions, and it gives you a wonderful description of our particular LTA. Historically, the LTA was an oak savanna and woodland on the upland surface, while oak and mixed hardwood forest covered the valley slopes and bottoms. Some poorly drained ephemeral wetlands and some prairies may have occurred on the flatter uplands. Today, the landscape is dominated by Columbia and its rapidly expanding urban influence. However, many of the valleys are still timbered and relatively wild. Many of the caves and their species are protected in parks and conservation areas. So, nice little description of where we live in this book. Okay, so that was sort of a look at the state level and the national, how the state fits into the nation, and some of the references you can look for to educate yourself about the communities. Now, how do we do conservation in this state? Well, we have two state agencies that do a lot of conservation: Missouri Department of Conservation and Missouri Department of Natural Resources. And then we have the U.S. Forest Service, which cuts a lot of trees and does some conservation, and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So, but the primary agencies that have done work on where to do conservation are DNR and MDC. And we worked with EPA Region 7 really early on, and some of these methods were adopted and used by MDC when they did the statewide terrestrial ecosystems look. One of the things I wanted to note is that if you're trying to figure out where to conserve, you have to figure out what to conserve. And if your conservation targets are different, the perceived areas that are best to conserve are different. So that's one thing. The other thing is, if you're looking to conserve areas in Boone County, you get a different answer than if you're looking to conserve areas in the state of Missouri or the United States or the world. So the size of your assessment region determines your perceived priorities, because you get the best stuff within that county, or you get the best stuff within that watershed. might not be the best stuff in the state, might not rank in the state, but if you're assessing the county, it's a different answer. Anyway. So to do the aquatic, somebody, Lynn, you asked about the aquatic. To do the aquatic assessment of priorities, we looked at the ecological drainage units, which are watershed divides, which are evolutionarily significant. And by that, here's what I'll say. Look here. You get a divide right here, and you see this stream flows this way north into the Missouri River. Right across this drainage divide, that stream flows south into the Arkansas White River drainage. So fish fauna and some other fauna are connected to those rivers. So the fauna in two streams that look identical, but they're across that drainage divide, will be significantly different. So there's evolutionarily significant drainage divides. So we looked at that. And then we also looked at the geophysical settings of the watersheds. That is, the landforms and geology of the watersheds. And we did a multivariate analysis on that. And two small watersheds that are across that evolutionarily significant drainage divide may be identical in their landforms and geology. So they would come out as the same ecological drainage unit. So it's probably too confusing to do. And then we looked for the best representation of each ecological drainage unit within each, of each aquatic ecological system, small watershed within each ecological drainage unit. And so that was done just based on the distribution of the fauna that we had data on and the condition of the watersheds. And then we took it out to the staff in the regional staff, and they looked at those initial, data sets, and from that we got watersheds we wanted to work on. So then all those watersheds by MDC, watersheds we wanted to work on by MDC. This was an MDC thing. And then on the terrestrial side, they looked at the distribution of the element occurrence records of rare species and significant natural communities. And again, a pretty rigorous look at things, and came up with these terrestrial conservation opportunity areas.
The question. So
Yeah.
would those be, were they looking at all of it, whether it was public or privately owned, or was that just for publicly owned?
That was looking at all of it, public or private. Now, when they went to look at where to work, they looked at ownership and where other people were working. And so they have these 10 priority geographies that they're working on. So there was a terrestrial assessment, and then there was an aquatic assessment. And then they looked at conservation organizations. Where are you working? A lot of public lands and so on. And these are the geographies where they're spending a lot of their time, MDC. There is a report. This is in a report online, and I could send you the address of that. And now we'll scope down more and more toward where we're standing. MDC has a site called Find Places to Go, and there they are for this area. Mainly, it's a hook and bullet organization. So, it says here, what can you do at Hinkson Woods, which is right below my house? It's within rocks throwing distance, bird watching, hunting deer, so on and so forth. Anyway, but it's nonetheless a really good source. You can go online and find these areas. The other conservation organization was the Department of Natural Resources. And Paul Nelson worked at the DNR for many years while he was writing this book. And there was a committee, a natural areas committee set up. And through analyses that are beyond me, because I don't know what they did, and expert opinion, a lot of expert opinion, they identified natural areas. These are mostly on public lands. I'm not sure they're not all on public lands. But there's a website. You can go there and you can see all these natural areas where they are. This lists 183. I don't know how old the data are. There may be more or fewer now. So we'll look at these two and what information you can find there. The one is Danville. Go towards St. Louis. You can get off on the Danville exit. You can go to the Danville Glades. And you can see the points of interest here. The largest limestone glades north of Missouri River enjoy rich wildflower and so on and so forth. So, and the natural area is this purple area right here. Well, as you know, glades are openings in the woods. So where are they? Well, it's just these little areas on the, guess what? South-facing slopes. They're the dry slopes in this landscape. So that's a zoom in on one of them. And one of the interesting things about these glades are that remember I told you there are sandstone caps in the river hills. So some of the glade on the upper slope on some of these ridges are sandstone glades. And then they're right next to limestone dolomite glades. And because of the difference in the pH, different species are on those two different kinds of glades. And it's very noticeable if you know the species. And this will tell you about it. This is all online. So on the sandstone, you have more like post oak, blackjack oak. On the limestone, more like chinkapin oak and Omelia. And then there's herbaceous species. Again, the glades, sandstone versus limestone, are also described in Nelson's book. So really good resources. This is the area. Paul Nelson also, he's multi-talented. He's like the god. He also identified the location of the glades in the Missouri Ozarks and all the way down into the Ouachitas of Arkansas. So these red things are the glades they mapped. And again, the natural area is this part right here. He didn't map any sandstone glades here. He called them limestone. I think he called them limestone glades. But there is sandstone there. It's just not as extensive. There are also Burlington limestone glades in Three Creeks. And I just wanted to show this. Right up here is where you park, where Jan's name is. That's the north parking lot. There's a south parking lot right over here. You could go here and look at glades. One of the things to note here, these openings are not natural. You know, they're not natural openings. And these green areas, there are two things in them. One is planted pine, which is right here. There's probably more. And the other is eastern red cedar. And eastern red cedar comes into clearings. It's a pioneer species in clearings. Okay, remember we were looking at two natural areas. Schnabel Woods is the other one. You can get there by going to McBain, walking toward Cooper's Landing for 1.5 miles and look for trails off to your left. There are a couple trails up into it. It's not really very easy access, but this is an area where you can see some of the mesic forest. And its distinction is there's basswood in the overstory canopy, maple, and northern red oak is the big thing. White oak is there as well, but it's a better canopy. It's more canopy than the woodlands. And I think some of it is over lush, at least on the upper slopes. Does anybody know about that? Yeah, yeah.
Jackson, I remember it was very open.
Yeah, on the understory, because there's not that much light that gets through the canopy. There was a paper by, I think it might have been Claire Kuchera, that defined these, described these, and I had it listed in one of the versions of this talk, but I don't know where the hell it went, so. But anyway, this is again from that website, it tells you what's there. Well, Ha Tonka. This is the castle. I'm sure a lot of you have been to the castle, and then you've walked the trail from the castle down to the lake. Well, there's a woodland there. It's mostly chert. It's mostly a chert woodland that DNR has been managing for like 20 years for open woodland. And there's big old oak trees in the open woodland. And then there's some dolomite glades in that same area. And this tells you all about it. And so the trail is called, I think there's a parking lot at the trail there. It's called Turkey Pin Hollow Trail, maybe. So this is a great place if you want to go and explore the dolomite glades and the open woodlands there. It's not a very long trail. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention our county's leader, Mike Courier. It's one of his favorite places to go because he helped do something to help create this place. So some of the mapping or something maybe. I say he's a great person to go with because he knows all.
Let me tell you about Mike Courier. His name is in this book prominently. He was working for Paul Nelson when Paul was doing this, and he knows everything about this county and in general about the natural areas. Sometimes a person might ask him whether they could give his name to somebody who is doing some work in like Boone County, and he'll say no. So, okay, I don't know if anybody's from St. Louis is watching, but there are data sets in St. Louis, ecological data sets, fine resolution mapping, just like they've done in Columbia for St. Louis that we did for that region, and conservation planning in that region. And that's all online at East-West Gateway Council of Governments. Then finally, I just thought I'd mention this, Hinkson Creek physical habitat. You can really do fine resolution land surface modeling based on LiDAR, and then you can tell where the streams are, and we did that for this area. Another thing you can divide up the watershed into sub-watersheds like we've done here, and then you can summarize the landforms and the vegetation in the different watersheds. I did this for you. I include this for you, and you can tell what part of the watersheds are wooded, what are crop, what are impervious. And the problem with the cropland and impervious, and to some extent the grassland, is that runoff is really fast. So you might want to, in terms of planning, you might want to say, well, which one of these sub-watersheds could ill afford to have more impervious, cover in them? It'd be the ones with the most impervious now, possibly. But there's hydrologic modeling that would have to be done. Don't look at this because that's the end of my slides. It's diamond.d@missouri.edu if you want to get in contact. But that was the end of my presentation. Are there any questions? Yes.
Speaking class, but I have a question. So in Columbia and then upcoming soon in Boone County, there's these master plans. Columbia has a master plan that says a certain part of it is environmentally sensitive area, but there's really no controls on that area yet. Hopefully we can make sure something like that gets put into the Boone County master plan if it's not already there. So how can we use this? And this may be too big of a question for this kind of forum, but how can we use this better for making sure to protect those environmentally sensitive areas from
Well-
development? Like, how do you know what's the right development? I mean, you were talking about
Well,
impervious surface, but
people are gonna do it just now. They're just gonna do it. People are working on it, right? But, there are two things I would think that to think about. One is simple rote stream buffering and not building on steep slopes.
right,
You know, those are easy, you know, and so that, then you could make a map of where those are.
but like that area in the Columbia plan that's marked environmentally sensitive, I think it's because it's over, I guess karst
Yep,
topography.
that's another one.
So, like, how do we know if they should be building like subdivisions over those areas?
Yeah, okay, I'm fresh out of ideas,
Okay,
you know.
I didn't know if that was like another book to say, okay.
No,
we have
no,
this information,
I think you-
what are we doing?
I think one of the things you have to do, and the other thing I was gonna talk about is the existing protected areas. I mean, you don't want to build on sensitive areas like slopes and near streams. And if possible, you don't want to build right up to the edges of protected areas. Those are like this no-brainer kind of things. But beyond that, you have to get everybody to buy in on what's sensitive and what isn't. If you identify 40% of the county as places you can't build, nobody's going to pay any attention. You have to identify 15 or 20 or 30%. I mean, if it gets too high, then, it's like, oh, these guys just don't want us to build any goddamn place. They don't want a house to go anywhere,
Which is not reasonable.
which is not reasonable. So you have to agree on, you have to have a lot of buy-in from a lot of different people. And you have to make sure it's restricted enough that people, if it's identified as sensitive, don't build there. They don't get to, you can't avoid the ordinance,
Right.
but it has to be a small enough area that people pay attention.
So just a comment, it's not a question. I have a question too, though. But I'll make my comment first on that topic, which is that I feel like there's a lot that you can ask of developers that isn't just build or don't build. It's, native landscaping, hold the water, discharge the water slowly, this much disturbed soil, this much footprint, don't do a moonscape regrading. There are some other things that you can sort of tweak in there, I think. But my question was going to be, I guess I'm just poking you because you're talking about like, well, some places where you have this much impervious surface, you can say you just can't have any more. But is it more important to say that there's a threshold, or is it like that's a lost cause? So just build everything there and then try to protect the subcatchments less.
Like New York City.
Yeah,
Yeah,
don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah,
You,
yeah.
what do you call a steep slope? What percent?
Oh, you have to agree on that. 30%, 20%. I don't know.
I've fought for slope protections here in Columbia, and then you go to Jeff City, it's like, how do they build in Jeff City, not on a slope?
Yeah, it's going to be on a slope, steep slope.
Are there, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Are there maps showing changes in land use over time? So those maps that sort of they're on like cellophane and they sort of overlay.
Yes, there are. There are national data sets showing disturbance over time from 1983 to present, annual.
Tracks that.
Oh, God, I'd have to look up the source for it. It's only available in GIS, you can't,
Right.
yeah.
Well, I'm curious, like over time, how the impact of especially commodity agriculture has impacted, say, prairie. And I'm sure that the Missouri Prairie Foundation probably has that data. But larger impacts also, like on the ecosystem services, on water quality, pollinators, native landscapes.
Yeah. Yep,
It's a lot.
it's a lot of analysis.
Yeah. And it sounds like different agencies are doing different pieces, so it's hard to put it all together.
True enough. Always the case, yeah.
I recently got something from the Arbor Day Foundation that said that they are looking to adjust the planting zones because of climate change.
Cool.
And,
I got that same thing.
well, we used to, hang out with Johann Brum. Did you know him?
Yeah,
And he gave a lot of presentations about how, you know, the hardwoods and everything are just, you know, everything's having to move north, you know, and trees don't move too fast, you know, but
yeah,
he was really, and this was like 5 years ago, he was telling us about.
yeah.
And have you noticed?
Oh, yeah, yeah, there, I personally, you know, I can't notice anything, but there are databases with trees, the predicted distributions of trees, climate envelope modeling and stuff like that. And, you know, I don't know how that's all gonna work out. I think the way I think of it is the trees that are already there are gonna rearrange their numbers more than trees are gonna move.
Yeah.
Because like you say, it's hard to move. Yeah. But it's gonna happen for sure. Oh,
spurs a question that you may not have an answer to, but are people, so I've got a friend who he was doing his master's. They were doing like adaptive plots up in like northern Minnesota, I think it was, where they're moving stuff like ponderosa pine up there. Things from out west that like might adapt to the climate as it changes. Is anybody doing anything like that in Missouri, like moving trees from the south?
oh,
here?
I'm not aware of it,
Okay, that.
but they might be. I wouldn't know. I wish people would stop that kind of shit though.
The road ecologists.
I mean, you know, what you're gonna do is get a non-native species that then invades them. Yeah,
And do we really need ponderosa pines after climate change? You know, it's like one of those
Yeah.
things.
well, that's all I had. Feel free to come up and look at these books.
Well, thank you very much, Dave.
Yeah.
We forgot to ask if there was any questions from the Zoom audience. Do you guys have any questions? I guess if you could have called, but not if you did, but you are welcome to now if you have one. And this was recorded, so it will be posted on our YouTube channel eventually, and you can find it there, or there'll be a link posted on Facebook, etc. So thanks everybody for participating. I'm going to go ahead and close the online meeting.